Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Location. I am of the opinion that FNAF 3 had the best ending out of every FNAF game, and I'm not talking about Happiest Day, I'm talking about the fire. It was perfect. The fire leaves Springtrap's fate up in the air, and we as the player, knowing what kind of nut job is inside that suit, can only hope that the fire took him out too. But when you brighten the image like any good horror movie villain, he survives. FNAF 3 is also my favorite FNAF game, so maybe I'm biased, but I really do think it's the best ending. And because I think it's the best ending, I want to theorize about it. I believe that this fire doesn't get talked about enough, and it could potentially prove who we play as in FNAF 3.
Whoa! Hold on! I'm on fire! I'm on fire!
Let's just get the most obvious explanation out the way first. This fire was not an accident. In the beginning of the game, Phone Dude talks about the possibility of the attraction actually burning down. He jokes about it at first, but then he talks about it being a real possibility. This leads some people to believe that the fire actually was an accident. It's sort of like a red herring, or maybe some kind of premonition for William's future fate, but it was not done on purpose. That's what some people believe. Now, I have more hardcore evidence to prove that this fire was not an accident that I have to save for later into the video. For now, the main reason why we know this fire was not an accident is because of Orville in Ultimate Custom Night. In Ultimate Custom Night, the vengeful spirit will sometimes speak through the mediocre melodies to torment or taunt William while the vengeful spirit is torturing William. And in one of these voice lines, he speaks through Orville the elephant and says the following.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not going to let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
The key parts of this voice line are the fact that Orville says, no matter how many times they burn us. That line tells us that both fires were intentional and done by a human being. You're not going to say they burn us if the first fire that William went through was an accident, because nobody would have tried to burn him. You don't use the word they to describe an object. You use the word they to describe a person, or potentially a spirit, but definitely not faulty wiring. So what Orville the elephant is telling us is that both of these fires were not only done intentionally, but also done to purposely try to hurt William. That's why he says, no matter how many times they burn us, as in multiple people have tried to burn you, and I don't care how many times they try to burn you alive, I'm going to keep you alive. If the FNAF 3 fire was an accident, this line makes zero sense, because the only attempt on William's life through fire in the entire series would be FNAF 6 if FNAF 3 was an accident. So because Orville the elephant specifically tells us that this happened multiple times, and the only two times that we see someone try to burn William alive is in FNAF 3 and in FNAF 6, that tells us that FNAF 3 fire has to have been done on purpose and by someone. This also rules out the possibility of Springtrap himself causing the fire, because Orville implies that whoever caused the fire was doing it to hurt William or to get William, to kill William, whatever. And William would not do that to himself. So that does cross Springtrap off the list of possibilities. But I do like the idea of Springtrap causing the fire, I'm not gonna lie, but it's not likely. So now that we've covered that it's not an accident and that it couldn't have been Springtrap himself, it was somebody purposely trying to get Springtrap, that leaves two real options for someone who was trying to burn Springtrap alive purposely: the Night Guard and the puppet. The idea of the puppet being the one to cause the fire is pretty interesting. Her spirit does appear to be in Fazbear's Frights. I don't know if I believe that she's actually there, but there are people who do think that. They theorize that, and I think it has some good evidence, but I don't necessarily know if I believe it. But regardless, if she is there, she is a solid candidate for causing the fire, because she purposely tries to get William to stop him from causing more harm to other people, or at the very least trying to undo the harm that he already did. So I don't think that her causing a fire to try to stop him once and for all is out of the question, especially because her dad does it later. But it does seemingly go against the good nature of the puppet that she's constantly been characterized as. She doesn't seem like the type of person to cause an entire fire to get to one person, especially if the Night Guard was there too, because he could potentially die in that fire too. At the end of the day, there isn't much that we can use to prove that she did the fire or didn't do the fire. There just is more evidence for the night guard. And why do we know this? The biggest clue is the newspaper that we get at the end of the game. The newspaper very specifically says the fire occurred overnight, and this is impossible because on the night that the fire happens, we are there. We're there from 12 to 6 a.m. and the place is not on fire. This can only mean that the fire didn't actually happen overnight, but instead occurred after the guard shift is over at 6 a.m. Since, like I said, we are literally in the building and there is no fire. This newspaper is inaccurate. Nobody describes things that happen past 6 a.m. as overnight. This means that somebody lied to the police or the reporters. The only person who would be in the position to lie to the police is the night guard. The night guard is factually the only witness that the police would be able to question. There is nobody else at Fazbear Frights at night. They weren't interviewing Springtrap. It's just the night guard, right? So they could only question the night guard about the fire. Now, if you don't believe the night guard caused the fire, let me ask you a question. Why would the night guard tell the police the fire happened overnight when it very obviously didn't? What reason would the night guard have to lie to the police unless he was the culprit? The man gains nothing from lying unless he was the cause of the fire. This is what really confirms that the only cause of the fire has to be the night guard. He's the only person who would be able to lie to the police about the fire happening overnight. They would have to take his word because he is the sole witness, since the night guard is the only person at Fazbear Frights at night. The news report also says they haven't even ruled foul play out yet, so it's very possible that they think the guard is lying too. Regardless, the night guard has to have lied to the police in order for this newspaper to make sense, since it directly contradicts what we see in game. The place is not on fire overnight. Now that we know the security guard is the fire starter, how can we use this information to determine who the security guard is? There are three real options for the guard. It's Michael Afton, Hudson from Fazbear Frights, and Henry the Cassette Man from Pizzeria Simulator. It could also be a random person, but if it is a random, then that's effectively the same thing as it being Hudson. Most people think that it is truly impossible to pinpoint the exact identity of the guard, and the game FNAF 3 does not give us enough information to properly figure it out. That leads a lot of people in the direction of it being Hudson, because Hudson has an entire story dedicated to him, and that makes sense. But there is one detail about the fire that makes Hudson being the guard very unlikely. It does not happen until night 6. If Hudson is the guard and he set the fire to try to kill Springtrap, why would he wait to do that 5 days after meeting Springtrap? Hudson is not a brave man. I mean, look at this guy. He's absolutely terrified. And in the book, he dies on the very second night. He is not characterized to be a tough, strong-willed person. I sincerely doubt he would be able to go all 6 nights in FNAF 3 sane and then decide to try to kill him after all that. But I hear you. Just because it's unlikely does not mean that it's impossible. Let's give Game Hudson the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that he's tougher than his book self, and he does make it through all 6 nights. The real issue with this interpretation is that the night guard causes the fire after Springtrap stops attacking them. Springtrap does not attack after 6 a.m. and the fire has to start after 6 a.m. because on night 6 we're sitting there and it's not on fire. So the fire starts after 6 a.m. This means that the security guard chose to come back after his shift to burn the place to the ground. Why would Hudson do this? Why would Hudson feel the need to do this when he's already safe and off the clock? Springtrap is no longer coming for him, but he still felt like he needed to burn the place down. Why would this man risk his entire job and potentially getting caught for arson when he's already safe and in the clear after 6 a.m. The book actually makes it very clear that Hudson would not do this because Hudson already is a suspect for arson in the book. Hudson being an arson suspect is a defining character trait because it affects his life tremendously. It ruins his ability to get jobs properly, and it ruins a potential relationship that he has with a woman named Faith in the book. Him being an arson suspect is a big deal. It's not something that he likes to mess around with. So based on the fact that this fire happens after 6 a.m., after the guard shift is over, if you believe the fright guard is Hudson, then that means you believe that this man sat through his entire shift almost dying from Springtrap, never burned down the place this entire time, and then when he was off the clock and Springtrap was no longer trying to kill him, he decided now was the time to burn it down. Like, if you were going to do that, you would just do it before you almost died from the guy you were trying to kill, right? Like you would do it at 12 a.m. or sooner, not after the guy was no longer trying to kill you. It just does not make sense for Hudson to choose to be an arson suspect again when he already survived the night. Like if the fire happened at the beginning of the night, then I would agree Hudson has some good evidence. But the fact that it happens after his shift makes it very unlikely for it to be Hudson. This is also why it can't be a random person, because a random person also wouldn't do this either. It only really makes sense for Michael Afton or Henry Emily to wait to after their shifts to do something like this. So which one of these two men caused this fire? To answer this question, we need to look back at Orville Elephant's line in Ultimate Custom Night, but this time we look at the entire line from beginning to end. Pay close attention to the dialogue here. The pronoun options used here tell us that Henry could not have caused both fires. The vengeful spirit speaking through Orville uses the word he at the beginning of the dialogue. He tried to release you. He tried to release us. This is obviously referring to Henry Emily, who does this in the FNAF 6 fire. The goal of this game and the FNAF 6 fire as a whole is to release the spirits. That is what Henry does, and that is what the vengeful spirit is referring to here. So he has to be Henry. The he here has to be Henry. This is why Henry could not have caused the FNAF 3 fire, because the vengeful spirit very specifically says he in the beginning of this dialogue, but then at the end of the dialogue, the vengeful spirit says they. Why would the vengeful spirit go from saying he to they? If it was Henry both times, the vengeful spirit would not have changed the pronoun usage. The vengeful spirit would have continued to say he. Clearly, the vengeful spirit had no problem saying he the first time, so why would the vengeful spirit have an issue saying he at the end of this dialogue if it indeed was the same person? The fact that the vengeful spirit chooses to use the word they tells us for a fact that the person who did the FNAF 6 fire and the person who did the FNAF 3 fire are not the same person. If they were the same person, the vengeful spirit would have either used he from the beginning of the dialogue to the end, or they from the beginning to the end. There's no reason for the spirit to switch up using he and they unless there are two different people who cause these two different fires. So because Orville specifically calls Henry out in the beginning, but then suspiciously stops using the word he and uses the word they instead at the end of the dialogue, that tells us for a fact Henry did not do both fires. Henry only did the FNAF 6 fire. And since Henry is now crossed off the table and Hudson is crossed off the table, that leaves Michael Afton as the only person who could possibly have done this fire. That is pretty much all that I have to say for this theory. It's really a process of elimination type theory, not rather here's all the evidence for Michael. It's rather here's why these guys don't work, so it has to be Michael. It's a little sad because I think that Henry being the FNAF 3 protagonist is an interesting story beat, and I think that he actually has a lot of evidence for it being him, but Orville's line makes that impossible because, like I said, Orville goes from saying he to they, and that just doesn't make sense if it's the same person. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who believe that Hudson is the FNAF 3 guard, so if you do believe this, tell me why you believe it in the comments. Tell me if there's some evidence that I missed. Tell me why you think I'm wrong. Be civil, please. We can have a discussion about it. I'm not opposed to being wrong. But with that being said, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video.